What is up, guys? Dzeeff here, and what is this? A deck profile on Dzeeff's channel in 2020? Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I know I haven't really been posting deck profiles because there hasn't really been events, and the format right now is kind of in a weird spot. However, with Phantom Rage, I am very excited to try out this new deck, Frogs. Well, I guess it's an old deck, but this deck got a bunch of support in Phantom Rage. Also, they just got towed back to 2 copies on the most recent Forbidden and Limited list, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it today because I feel this deck is actually one of the biggest underdogs in the format right now. If you guys enjoyed today's video, let me know by subscribing to the channel for more content, and also please use my link to tcgplayer.com if you guys want to buy any of the cards that you see in this deck profile. So Frogs are good for 3 big reasons right now, and don't tell anyone, but I think they might be better than Altergeist in a lot of ways. So the first big reason is this new card, Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. This basically turns your Toad or Paleozoic rank 2 monster or whatever Exceeds monster you have into a 3000 attack evenly matched, which is obviously pretty crazy. The second big difference here is that we now have access to Warning Point, a very good normal trap card that does help this deck out quite a lot. The idea with Frogs or Altergeist for that matter is just surviving the first couple of turns. Once you can summon a totally awesome, you pretty much just win the game, and Warning Point is very good at just stalling out your opponent when they're trying to combo off on their first turn. Finally, this deck can play a Floodgate that Altergeist cannot play, Goes in a Match, and I think Goes in a Match is one of the best cards in the game right now. It's just that pretty much no deck can play it. Obviously though, because no deck can play this card, it is very good because it means that no deck is very good at playing around it, and Frogs are one of the better decks that can use it because you can protect it with Totally Awesome. Anyway, here is the deck profile for Frogs, and this is kind of a skeleton of a deck. You can make whatever changes you want to. As we go through here, I'll talk about some changes that I considered while I was building the deck, so you guys can sort of fine-tune it for your own metagame. Of course, we have 3 copies of good old Swap Frog, and yeah, the middle one has always been damaged since day 1. Rest in peace, Swap Frog. But 3 copies of Swap Frog, great card. Obviously, you want to open this card in every single hand, and I cannot wait for a Pot of Disparity because that card's gonna be crazy in this deck. We also have 3 copies of Dupe Frog, of course, the most educated of all the frogs, and 2 copies of good old Ronin Totem. Nothing too crazy here. If you guys have played Frogs, you've probably seen these 8 cards in like every single deck list. For the hand traps, we have 3 copies of Nibiru. So Nibiru seems very good. It looks like a lot of people are playing this card. There are a lot of big combo decks in the format right now, and this deck going second is not super great, so you want something like Nibiru to sort of equalize the entire field. We also have 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. I will say here that this card could be Effect Failure. It also could be Gamma Seal if you are very afraid of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. This deck does not do a very good job in game 1 of outing Dark Dragoon. It's just sort of a fact if you're going to play this deck, so you can play Gamma Seal or Veiler to help deal with that card. The only reason that I'm not playing either of those cards in the main deck, I think that Ash Blossom is better like across the board, and your opponent has to actually go first and open Dragoon for the other cards to be necessary. When you're going first, you'd much rather have an Ash Blossom because Gamma Seal does basically nothing, but if you are playing this deck, make sure you're siding 3 copies of Gamma Seal. I think right now it is absolutely mandatory, and maybe not in the main deck, but definitely in the side deck. This version plays no spell cards, so now we're on to the traps. We have 3 copies of Trap Trick, one of the craziest cards in this deck. There are currently 5 different cards that you can set with Trap Trick. In this main deck, you can do all sorts of things. It's a very good card, and it gets even better after side decking. You can set like Waking the Dragon. If you get Lightning Stormed, you can set a Pointer of the Red Lotus. You can set Heavy Storm Duster, all sorts of good cards, so I like Trap Trick a lot. We also have 3 copies of Dino, so obviously this card's always been good in Paleozoics. I used to not be a big fan of it, but this deck does play a lot of hand traps, so you will have cards in your hand to discard. No worries there, and yeah, very good card. Next up, we have 3 copies of Canadia. So this is one of the big cards that you're using to stun your opponent when they do that first crucial normal summon. You just flip it face down. It's not as good as Warning Point, but Warning Point also isn't a paleo monster, so it doesn't have that advantage. And yeah, still a good card. It's always been good against combo decks, and right now it's particularly good just for stopping your opponent before they summon those big Link monsters. We only have 2 copies of Olenoids. I don't think that this card is particularly good right now. I think that there aren't a lot of back row decks out there. Obviously against Eldritch you want more copies of this card, but you can side deck the extra copy if you want to, in addition with cards like Lightning Storm or Heavy Storm Duster, but in the main deck I think 2 is just fine. We also have, of course, 3 copies of Gozen Match. As I was saying, this card is insane right now. So a lot of decks are using like one type. I mean, we see like dragons and dinosaurs, but they have all sorts of attributes. I mean, this thing is just crushing for any deck that's playing dragons or dinosaurs. Obviously, we have those decks in the format, but even if they're just playing like generic Link combos with like Helki Firebacks, Gozen Match just shuts down those decks entirely. This thing is so strong right now, and it's pretty crazy that most decks can't play this card, but this one can play it and protect it with Totally Awesome, so it's a mandatory 3 of. Not to mention, going second, you can have this card on like a Solemn Strike and break pretty much any board, because you'll flip the Gozen Match, and if your opponent has the negation, you just strike the negation and then their entire board is cleared. Pretty strong card right now, and one of the biggest reasons to play frogs. Next up we have, well, we're supposed to have 3 copies of Warning Point, but I only have 1 copy right now because I've only pulled 1 in the 4 boxes that I've opened, but so I have the Lost Wind, and Lost Wind is like pretty similar if you guys can't afford Warning Point, but it looks like Warning Point is going to be like $10 or less once the set actually is released. I would imagine by the end of the weekend this card will be like dirt cheap. So this card is very good in this deck. Lost Wind is fine as well, but Warning Point is a huge selling point of playing a back row deck right now. It's just so good. It's like no material plus breakthrough skill. You can set it off Trap Trick if you want. Very good card, and a 3 of in my opinion in this deck. We also have 6 Solemn cards, so we have 3 copies of Judgment, which obviously is fantastic in any back row deck, and 3 copies of Solemn Strike. If you are very worried about going second, you could cut the Solemn Judgments from your main deck in order to like play more cards like Gamma Seal or Veiler in the main deck. I don't necessarily think that's like the greatest choice. I think Judgment is really good, especially when you can open it going first, and I think that I mean, yeah, going second the deck's a little bit rocky, but you do have 9 hand traps when you add in the final 3 cards, the 3 impermanences, and so I think you do have ways to stop your opponent's combos, and I think you don't want to go too heavily on going second because it'll reduce how good your deck is when you go first, and obviously this deck is supposed to be good when you actually win the die roll. Anyway, that is the main deck. It is 40 cards there. Hopefully I mentioned enough cards that you could try to swap out. You could also play Pot of Desires if you want to. I personally have never really liked that card in this deck. I'll probably just wait for Pot of Disparity, but if you want to play that card, you certainly can. On to the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. That is a crazy long name. Very good card in any Xyz deck. I would imagine a lot of people, if they're picking up frogs right now, will be picking up because of this card. It is just so good in this deck, in any deck really, but because Frog Paleozoics have always struggled to break boards going second, this card is just a fantastic addition. We now have 2 copies of Totally Awesome. Whoever thought we'd see the day? No, I'm pretty sure that this card will go to 3 copies per deck on the next Forbidden and Limited list, but for now we have 2 copies, which is better than nothing, I suppose. We have 1 copy of Opabania and 1 copy of whatever this thing is. We should have 2 copies of this card. I certainly have at least like 3 copies somewhere, but I couldn't find them for the deck profile. I'm so sorry about that, but you should play 2 copies of this card, but we have 1 in here for now. We have 1 copy of Sky Calvary, which is technically a Dragoon out if you can bait the negation. I don't think it'll happen too often, but it might happen. Regardless, this card is pretty good. You can like bounce a card back to your opponent's hand. And then 1 copy of Daigusto Phoenix. This should be the Opabania, so if you have 2 copies of this card, you definitely should play 2 copies, but Phoenix is like okay, but this card's probably like 1 cent, so I think that most people will be able to get 2 copies of it. And then we have 3 copies of Mistar Boy. Sorry, I don't have a 3rd super. I think Mistar Boy is very good right now. I think this deck does want to just sort of stun your opponent for a couple turns and then put out a big board with a bunch of water monsters, and Mistar Boy is really good for OTKs. For the other Link monsters, we have 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Ningirsu instead of Unicorn, because this card is pretty good. It's like non-targeting removal. And then for our Link 4s, we have Borolo Dragon, which can out Dragoon if you can bait the negation, and 1 copy of Boral Sword Dragon, which is mandatory in this deck. You have so many ways to OTK your opponent. Boral Sword is very good. You can also use access code Talker instead of the 3rd Mistar Boy, or maybe maybe instead of like the Borolo Dragon, but I think overall this is a pretty fine extra deck and pretty close to what I would play if I was playing in a tournament. I will mention here, I think I've mentioned a lot of these side decks so far, cards like Lotus, cards like Heavy Storm Duster, cards like Gamma Seal, cards like Lightning Storm, but also that Gizmek Uka, I think it's called, into Barrier Statue of Torrents is very good in this deck. Once again, not only is it a good hand trap, but also it's a water monster, so you can discard it with Swap Frog, you can add it back with Totally Awesome, just like you could with Gamma Seal as well. Barrier Statue of Torrents is actually very good in this deck, even when you're going first, just because you can summon it and set a card like Warning Point or Canadia, and then use those cards to stop your opponent's normal summon and effectively lock your opponent out of the game. I think that frogs are a lot better than people are currently giving them credit for. They got a huge boost with Phantom Rage with 2 new cards, in addition to the ban list giving them 1 copy of Totally Awesome back, so now they have 2 total copies. Anyway though, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.